You advocate for a hiring scorecard as an alternative built around like the missions, the outcomes, competencies. For a founder who's hearing this and is like, oh my God, what is a what is a hiring scorecard? Help me. How how does that actually look like in practice? What would you tell a founder that's coming to you?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Danielle. So if we think about the job description as a list of activities, the hiring scorecard is the blueprint for the role, right? So in the same way that you would not hopefully start building a house without a blueprint, you should not go into hiring without a blueprint.
Just vibe house building.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so the idea of this scorecard was pioneered by two guys, Randy Street and Jeff Smart. And if anyone's interested listening, they wrote an excellent book called Who, which is a framework for hiring. And chapter 2 of that book introduces this idea of the scorecard, right? So really what the scorecard is, it's internal only. We don't give it to the candidate. It's for every single interviewer. It can be an A4 page or a letter page, depending on where you are in the world. And it's made up of 3 parts, right? The first part is the mission of the role. In other words, why does this role exist at our company? And that mission needs to be in very clear, simple language, very short, that anyone in the company can understand. The reason being is you're going to ask other people not in this function to be involved in the interview process, right? So no jargon, no thing. A really good example is the mission of the AE role at our company is to own a territory of companies of 100 to 500 employees and meet and exceed their quarterly target. Everybody can understand that, right? That's the mission, right? The next part of the scorecard is the outcomes, right? So we've talked about why the role exists. This is what the role is required to achieve, right? And so the outcomes are either measurable things, pipeline generation target or quota or some KPI that you can measure, or if it's a role where there aren't necessarily KPIs, it's something observable that you can see happened or did not happen. For example, an outcome might be for a marketing hire, we'll release our version 1 marketing plan after the first 90 days. That's an outcome. So measurable. So in other words, they're either KPIs that you want them to achieve or they're outcomes. And in the book, Street and Smart talk about this idea of A players. What you want to do is hire an A player. And they define that as the 10% of candidates that have a 90% or better chance of achieving those outcomes, right? That's how they define it. So those outcomes should be achievable, but only by that rare 10%. So in other words, there should be a bit of a stretch, achievable, but a stretch. And the reason you want to do that is B and C players will ultimately self-select themselves out of the process once they realize, actually, I'm going to have to hit some kind of target I know is not attainable. An A player will be like, I'm up for the challenge. I've done this before, right? So there's the mission, why this role exists. There's the outcomes, what is this role required to produce and in what time frame? And I would typically say have no more than 2, 3, 4 outcomes because it's hard to test for that. And then the real meat of the scorecard is what we call the competencies. And the competencies are the behaviors that you're looking for and the skills that translate from those behaviors. So, for example, you may want to have a competency that says, we're looking for a communication competency, right? I want the behavior of someone as a good communicator. Well, what's the skills associated with that? Well, in our company, that means you can you can communicate briefly. You can adjust your communication style depending on the audience because you may have to talk to junior people and senior people. Maybe we may want to have someone who's got skills of communicating effectively over different mediums, written, presenting, etc. So the behavior is communication, but the skills we can define. Similarly, collaborative, right? Knows how to work in a team, knows how to bring in people to help them achieve a goal, is open to coaching and mentoring others, right? So you start to deconstruct these behaviors into skills. And then the goal is to probably have no more than 7, 8, 9 of those competencies. Any more than that, it becomes very hard to test unless you have round after round after round of interview.
Yeah, which those A players are not going to love.
Yeah, exactly. So what I generally suggest is 7 to 9, break them up in chunks of 2s to 3s and maybe 4s, split that over 2 or 3 of the team and maybe just do these interviews back to back, right? Have the candidate come in and just go, right, we're going to focus on these 3 things for 45 minutes, etc., etc. And you collect the results in the scorecard. The rating can be, thumbs up, thumbs down. Some people do traffic lights, but I've seen that doesn't work so well because people start sneaking in different colors. They go, well, it's not quite red, but it's a kind of orange. I personally prefer, meets, does not meet, exceeds, something like that. You will all put your scores down. And then when the candidate's been through the whole process, you will all sit down and review how you felt about all those competencies, hash out where there's discrepancies, and make a hire, no hire decision. So it's a way of actually having a bit more structure and collecting data in a structured fashion. So I've seen this work incredibly effectively for technical founders who've never hired commercial roles because they go, "Oh, I can deconstruct this now and collect the right data, and I know how to do it."